This one's to you guys. We have successfully passed 10K. I want to thank everyone who's checked out the recent videos and subscribed. This is as much your victory as it is mine. I'm putting out the content weekly, but you guys hit that like button and subscribe. And recently, a ton of comments, which have been great. As you can see, I try to reply to every one of them. For those of you that are new, since there are so many new people, my name's Chase Maddox. I'm a guitarist. I studied with Barry Green at the University of North Florida. Been playing guitar for about 16 years now. I also co-founded Jazz Memes, which you guys might know of, on Instagram with my brother Kevin. We currently have about 250,000 followers on Instagram, and it's been a great jazz community we've built there. But right now, we're talking about YouTube, and I'm trying to give you awesome educational content every week. Right now, I'm releasing them on Saturdays, weekly lessons on Saturdays, and a quick lick every Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on the schedule, with a quick line that you guys can learn from as a YouTube short. So that's what you can expect right now. I do encourage all the comments that I've been getting. It's been great. It really helps me as well know what kind of content you guys want to see. So feel free to comment. It's great getting to talk with you guys and have conversations on whatever topic I'm bringing up. Today's topic is the most important 251 line, and we are going to get right into it before I get too many comments about how I delay at the beginning of videos. But I like to have a little conversation at the beginning, get to know you guys, and give you something to drop in the comments. So let's get into it. This is definitely more of a beginner intermediate lesson today. Although if you're advanced, this connects to my previous lesson on picking. We're going to use that same sort of picking style. And it's a great refresher. Like, I found myself, even in practicing this in all the positions, really getting a better understanding of some fundamental stuff. So it's a fundamental type of lesson. If you're beginner intermediate, this is definitely for you. And you can, again, ask any questions in the comments below. So let's get into it. Okay, so like the title says, this is what I consider one of the most fundamental 251 lines. And before we get into the line, let's just briefly talk about what is a 251. So 251 is referring to a type of chord progression, a well-used one in jazz. The two referencing the second chord in whatever key we're in. So in this case, we're going to do this in the key of C major. So our second note in the C major scale is D. And if we built a chord off of D, skipping in thirds, we'd have D, F, A, C. That gives us a D minor 7 chord. So that's what we use as our 2 chord or 2 minor 7. Our 5 chord, if we did the same idea, 5 notes from the scale in C, C, D, E, F, G, we have G. Again, if we build a chord in thirds from there, we'd have G, B, D, and F. Building a chord in thirds just means we're skipping every other note. We're moving in threes. G, A, B is 3, and that's a third. So G, B, D, F is G7. For that, we're using that as our 5 chord, a 5 dominant chord it's called. So 2, 5, and then the 1 chord is C major, built off C, so C, E, G, and B, C major 7. So that's a standard 251 progression, and it happens a lot in jazz standards and gets used a lot by jazz musicians. So the context of 251 line is that when we're soloing in a jazz context, one of the big differences from like blues or rock playing is we try to make the changes. So making the changes is the notes we play in our solo, we want it to follow or outline the differences in one chord to the next. So if D minor 7 has D, F, A, C, then when we move to G7 and it has some of those notes are different from D minor 7, we want to emphasize that. That's what making the changes is. It's emphasizing the differences from one chord to the next. The main one being, in this first example, and the main principle we'll talk about for this, is sevenths and thirds. So let me play the line first, and then we'll get into some of the specifics. So the line that we're looking at is... Okay, so what's happening here is over D minor, we start on the third of D minor, F, go down the scale. So F, E, D, C, 4 eighth notes, right? And then we go to B over G7. This is what we call 7th to 3rd motion, 7th to 3rd voice leading, because the 7th of D minor, the C, resolves down to the 3rd of G7, which is B, that half step. So 7th to 3rd motion in a 251 resolves by half step. And it outlines the changes because just by playing the line, we almost hear the chords. Or there's a sense that it goes from D minor to G7 at the moment we go from C to B. And then that last one is to C major. So it's really important in your lines to be aware of this 7th to 3rd voice leading, and those are the kind of lines you want to start building for yourself or working on when you're transcribing. So this line has that in here, and it's good to practice that. Again, we're going to do this in this 3rd position, looking at this D minor, G7 flat 9, and then C major. And the PDF that's associated with this that you guys can get below has all the other positions and 2 octaves in one of the positions, if you guys want to work this out over the whole neck. But you'll have everything you need for at least one of the positions in this video. So going through that, we have that 7th to 3rd motion, resolving down to the 3rd here, fully of C major, which is E. The other thing that this line really teaches you as a principle, and that's what I want to do in this video, is go over some of the main principles in creating lines and what makes jazz different from, say, like blues soloing, and show you how this line and variations of this line bring out those principles, those main concepts that you can use with other lines and make note of. So again, it's a good refresher for those that are more advanced or teaching other students to have this as an example of a line that has a lot of these elements that work in jazz contained in one. So the other element here, and one thing that other soloists or beginning soloists struggle with, is direction of the line. The whole line continues in one direction, in this case descending, until it resolves. So that kind of direction of line, whether it's ascending or descending, where it continues and has what feels like a purpose to it, it's continuing one direction until it resolves, is a good way of starting off approaching solos. Obviously, all of these rules and principles I'm going to be talking about have exceptions to them, and there's a ton of masters that can break these rules because they know them, but this is really just at the foundational level what's going on in jazz. We want our line to have a certain direction. We don't want to have to be going back and forth, up and down, where our line doesn't seem to have any sort of purpose. So it's always helpful to build your lines in one direction, whether ascending or descending, until your resolution point. All right. Now from this line, we can start to do different variations. Instead of resolving to the 3rd of C major on that E, we can do an enclosure and resolve on the 5th. So this is another very commonly used bebop language on 2-5-1 lines, and we're going to look at in the context of this line. So we start always the same. It's going to be the same 4 notes the whole time. Instead of going to that E, though, we're going to go. So the ending of our line changed. And now it resolves to G. This is going to be really important because what you'll start to get a feel for is how, with the shape of a line, you can start to control where you want to resolve. So it's not like a lot of beginner musicians will, in this context in soloing, will think they have to plug in a line into their 2-5-1, and then it's just like regurgitating something that they've learned in the practice room. You want to learn the line, the shape of the line, the direction of it, but also be able to alter where you're resolving. Know how do I change this line if I want to resolve to the 3rd? How do I change it if I want to resolve to the 5th? This is one way you would change it if you want to resolve to the 5th of the major chord instead of the 3rd. Again, so we hit that B, which is the same, and we're going A flat, and then we go up from F to the G. And that's why we call this an enclosure, because this last part encloses the G. It's almost like we're sighting a target and we go above the target, below the target, and then hit the target, being the note G. So one more time, we have that line. So that's another variation to get us used to the bebop enclosure. Another principle that we might see in creating our lines is this idea of octave displacement. So if we go back to one of these first lines, let's do the first one we did. If we want to do that one, we can take that A flat and move it up an octave, which would sound like this. We go up to this A flat, and then continue the line down. still resolved to the third, but it's this high E instead of this low E. And that's really important because if we want to move up higher in our line, we can do that from the same starting point we had. So goes to E, goes to E. Okay, if we want to do that octave displacement in combination with our bebop enclosure, we can do that as well. And now we resolve to the fifth. So we have all four of those variations here. Few more things we can look at in regard to this line. Let's again start with the same four notes. Now, instead of going to A flat, we can go to D. So we're going to go to D, F, A flat, and then resolve to G. So let's look at that one. It's another way to get to that same resolution point. So what's important here, and the principle I want you to think of here, is this idea that when we're soloing and we're creating these lines, we are trying to control the tension that we're creating with the notes over this dominant chord, and we're also directing where we resolve that tension based on what note we end our line on. So a big theme here in soloing in general is this idea of tension and release, and that applies to soloing across genre. So I want you to think of that as this main underlying principle. When you're creating your solo, you're trying to create tension and release. It's one of the reasons why if we solo over a standard using just a major scale, it doesn't sound that good, because we're not creating enough tension, and adding in these chromaticisms will really help you with adding in tension that then can resolve properly. So it's really important. So after that line, we can add in our bebop enclosure. This brings another principle in here of delayed resolution. So we don't end our G on the downbeat. This is super common in bebop language as well. We are delaying that resolution because of this enclosure, and it actually comes in a beat later than expected. Another common principle here. So hopefully you're seeing that there's a lot of principles involved here, and I'm trying to elucidate some of those while teaching you this line, these variations on this line. All right, so we have that. Now, instead of going to the higher D, we could go to the lower D. We could go to this D down here and resolve to the G. So again, these large interval leaps are common in bebop language, and this will also help you get fingerings for those large intervals. Usually 6 can be a little bit tricky on guitar. Maybe not as tricky as consecutive fourths where you have to roll your finger and stuff, but 6 are still a little bit awkward on guitar, so we want to practice the right fingerings for those. Another variation on that with the bebop enclosure. So all in all, we have 8 different variations on this one shape of the line. That's what I want you guys to think of. It's not, these 8, 9 notes are a single line. It's this shape of the line. It's the starting point and the resolution, and then you can direct where that goes. Whether I want it to be that high G, this low G, low E, low E, or higher E. There's all these variations, and you can do that when you're comfortable with these underlying principles of thirds and sevenths, sevenths moving to thirds by half step. We have tension and release. We have octave displacement. We have bebop enclosures. One more principle that I want to make a little bit more explicit is this idea that strong chord tones fall on downbeats. So if we think of this as eighth notes, and we think of each of the chords, we're going to reference each of the chords that we're playing over. So when it's D minor 7, we're referring to D minor 7, and then when we switch to G7, we're going to refer those notes in reference to G7. Is this idea. Strong chord tones go on strong beats, which are downbeats. So we play the F first on the downbeat, 1, and it's a strong chord tone because it's part of the chord we're playing. So it outlines that chord. It's part of that chord. it details the structure of it. So F is on a downbeat, 1, and then on next downbeat, 2 is D, another strong note. So third, root, and then in reference to G7, B is our third, root, and then third again. So we're really doing third, root, third, root, third is our underlying structure. The other notes are passing notes to effectively transition us into the next chord tone. But what I want you to get out of this is in your soloing and in your creation of lines, at first you want strong chord tones to land on strong beats. There's a lot of exceptions to that rule, but it's a good way of starting so you can start to hear why lines sound the way they do, how to make it sound like you're playing the changes. And that's a big part of that. So strong chord tones on strong beats. Your strong chord tones are the notes in the triad or the full chord that you're playing over. So D minor, DFA or DFAC, G7, GBD, GBDF, and then C major, CEG, B. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, guys. Please drop a comment with a topic you'd like me to cover or what you're just currently struggling with, what you have questions on, and I will see how I can help. I'll reply to all the comments. Again, thanks for 10K. This is really awesome, and I'm excited to see where we can build this guitar community, jazz guitar community. We'll see how it develops. But thanks again, and I appreciate all the likes, comments, and subscribes. I will see you next week.